Steve Stories. Living together in a small town, Steve and I became good friends. He was a good guy and was always up for fun. The surrounding farmers would hire us in the summer to handle the hay bales as they took them out of the field. It was hot and hard work, but we were young and in need of money. Besides that, it was a social experience where we always had fun together. Normally, he had two guys on the rack, one to drive the tractor hauling in, another to put the bales on the elevator, and three in the barn to stack the bales. Nobody was ever crazy enough to let me drive the tractor. One day, we had worked especially hard all afternoon. It was getting toward the last of the bales, and we all knew Steve was deathly afraid of snakes. Sometime during the day, a snake would always get caught half in and half out of a bale. It would wiggle and squirm to get free. But the snakes in our area were not poisonous, so there was no danger. I was told early in the day that if I found a snake in one of the bales, to make sure it was snake up when going up the elevator. This day, I was stacking the bales on the elevator, and Steve was the first guy in the unloading crew in the barn. My job was to make sure I didn't put the bales on the elevator too close, so they had time to handle each one without going too fast. I had done this most of the day and nobody complained. I waited until the last few bales were to go up into the barn. I knew that to surprise Steve and keep him from seeing the snake coming up the elevator, I had to place the bales closer together, so he was too busy to watch. I did so, and he was working as fast as he could. I cautiously placed the snake bale on the elevator. Up it went, and when it got to the top, Steve reached over and grabbed it. He looked down and saw the snake, screamed like a girl, dropped the bale, and ran away as fast as he could, even though the other bales were falling off the end. He later came out of the barn, gave me a cussing, and told us all to kiss his ass for laughing at him. On a different day, we had had a long day of baling hay. We were covered with hay chaff, hot and itching everywhere. Not far away was a small pond where we had permission to swim, so we decided to cool off before going home. All of us showed up, stripped off, and jumped into the water. There was a small floating dock in the middle of the pond that we could swim to, dive off of, and just lay around sunning and resting. Eventually, when we were ready to go home, somebody got the idea that we should race back to the shoreline dock. Now, I'm the world's worst swimmer and extremely slow. But what the hell, I dove in with the rest of them and joined the race. There were always water snakes in this pond, but they would see us coming and quickly slither into calmer water. This day was no exception. Steve had already reached the dock and was standing there waiting for me to arrive. What I didn't realize was one of the water snakes was slithering across the lake at the same time I was swimming toward the shoreline. Nobody said anything, or maybe didn't notice, but we were on a crash course with each other. It was bound to happen. I took a stroke down and hit that snake across its body. Immediately it wrapped around my arm. I reached and grabbed it by its head, the only time I ever touched a snake. Truth be known, I'm just as afraid of snakes as Steve. So here I was, holding a snake in one hand, his body wrapped around my arm, and I was trying to pull him off while at the same time trying to kick all the water out of the pond. All I could hear was Steve hollering, "Oh, oh, oh." After I finally got the snake off my arm, I threw it as far away from me as I could. I swam as fast as I could to the dock, which seemed like it took an hour and a half. When I got to the dock, Steve was running from one end of the dock to the other end of the dock, still hollering, "Oh, oh, oh." When I climbed up the ladder, Steve asked if I was all right, and then promptly ran over into the bushes and puked. Although Steve puked, I probably would have done more in my pants if I'd had any on. We all had a good laugh and went home. I can't remember ever going back to that pond again. As young kids, we were always camping, or, in other words, trying to get away from our parents for a night of cussing and smoking. Our excuse was we were going fishing. We lived near the Spoon River. We would set bank poles along the river and wait until fish happened by to take the bait. We would check the poles all night and sometimes actually catch a few fish. Steve was always the first to fall asleep. This night was no different. We all had been talking and having fun when we looked over and saw Steve sound asleep. We tried to wake him, but he would just toss around a bit, roll over, and go back to sleep. So, going by the young boy code, we knew we had to do something. We had a fire burning and got to wondering what would happen if we slowly moved the fire closer to his feet. He had on rubber boots, so we weren't going to hurt him very bad. We slowly added wood to the fire and kept building it closer and closer. In due time, you could see him kind of stirring around. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, jumped up, danced around, and then turned to run straight for the river and jumped in. We were all in stitches. I had tears rolling down my cheeks from laughing so hard. Come to find out, he'd been dreaming he was on fire. When he woke up, he felt his feet burning hot, and just as you would expect, he wanted to put out the fire, thus jumping into the river. Another time, Steve and I were out hunting rabbits. We had walked a long ways, and it was cold outside. We had shot a few and were resting along a broken-down fence row. As happens when you're out in the cold, you always need to pee. So Steve stood up, unzipped his pants, and started to pee in the fence row. What we didn't know was that because that part of the fence had broken down, the farmer had put up an electric fence. Somehow that part of the fence had also gotten pushed down with the rest of the fence and was out of sight. It didn't take long for Steve to find out the fence wire was still alive. When that pea hit the electric fence, he screamed, and the shock took him to his knees. He fell to the ground, rolled around, writhing in pain. It didn't take him long to understand what he'd done. It's something comedies are made from, and it was an Oscar winner.